Hello and welcome to this special discussion on the 24-25 budget. Uh, we have with us Yamini Aiyar, who is a senior fellow, visiting fellow at Brown University, and more importantly, earlier she was director at the Center for Policy Research, and at the CPR she did a lot of work on on public expenditure in social infrastructure and also on determining the efficacy of spending outcomes, etc. Closely working with governments, state governments. So therefore, Yamini will be very, as a public policy analyst, she'll be very helpful in telling us about the a host of new programs that this government has announced in this budget, Nirmala Sitharaman. Uh, because in budget after budget, as we all know, we hear a lot of noise. We hear big numbers. We hear big programs, high-sounding programs, whether it's in agriculture or employment or in education or social infrastructure. But then eventually we are all forced to get down to deep down and look at the real efficacy of those programs and and the real spending and the real design of those programs also. So welcome to the show, Yamini. Uh, I would start by just broadly seeking your views on the broader message in the budget. What does it do to revive uh, growth, private investment, and employment, and also what does it do to counter some of the structural flaws which have got embedded in our economic system over the past decade, which in spite of great efforts by this government, they've not been able to overcome. So just give me your broad overview. Yeah.
Thanks, Venu. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on the wire and talking to you. My takeaway from the budget is as follows. There was a political imperative to recognize the problem, and the problem was visible during the elections. It is the rising crescendo of the challenge of growth without jobs, and jobs being at the center of what is shaping and frankly undermining the aspirations and possibilities for the vast majority of India. So very early on in her budget speech, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman says that this full budget is going to focus on the challenges of employment, of skilling, of MSME. She lays it out front and center. So I was
Yeah.
excited that maybe we are going to see something. The message of the mandate was read, and then we got a status quoist, extremely remarkably status quoist, in fact, for the continuity that that it brings kind of budget. And in fact, what it does, to my mind, is it reiterates and reenacts the tensions of economic policy making that we've seen, to be fair, over the last 30 years, but in a much more sharp way in these last 10, owing to policy steps and missteps. And it does very little to resolve the problem. In fact, I would argue that it may well risk sharpening it. Let me explain my point in my argument by making 3 points. Number
Yeah.
one, the first critical issue is actually laid out in the economic survey, which reminds us that corporate profits, and here the CEA uses a survey of 30,000 companies, have seen their profits pre-tax grow 4 times. And remember that
Yeah.
we had a big cut in corporate tax rates, so corporates are really
2019 September. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And this hasn't necessarily meant more investments, even in the formal sector, in increasing wages or in employment. But we'll just set that one fact aside for a second. Now, juxtapose what's happening in the corporate sector with what is happening in the unorganized sector, which is visible in the annual survey of unincorporated enterprises that the government just put out for the same period, 2020 to 23, which tells us that growth in manufacturing enterprises and employment, therefore, in in those enterprises has stagnated. In fact, it's reduced compared to 2015-16, which is when the last survey was done. So
Yeah.
there's been a lot of blustering and denial of the K-shaped economy. K-shaped meaning formal economy is growing, the top 10% is growing, and the rest is sort of going down.
Yeah.
And these two surveys tell us exactly what we confront. So
And
you
and,
would think,
and yeah, you're
go
right.
ahead.
And the K-shaped has been, even Mumbai private sector researchers have talked about K-shaped,
Absolutely.
except only the government has been in denial. Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely. But our politicians are pretty smart, right? They have to go to the people to fight elections. So they know what's going on. And they know that they have to pay at minimum lip service to it, if not ideally, which we would like as voters, resolve the problem. What we've got, therefore, is a budget that says we need to solve the employment problem. It picks up two ideas that have been buzzing around policy corridors. Congress says it's their ideas, policy analysts, economists, everybody has been throwing these ideas around. Employment linked incentives, internship slash apprenticeship as solutions. But now look at the look beneath a little bit. What are these schemes? These schemes are linked to the EPFO, and the internship is about internships in corporates, right? So it's
yeah,
basically about the formal segment of the economy. It may move a few jobs into the formal segment of economy. No problem with that. Formalization means that you get a lot more in terms of overall social security benefits, but it doesn't address this vast reality that the both our periodic labor force survey data and the unincorporated enterprises survey tells us of the informal economy.
true,
So
true, true. Yeah, yeah,
you've got some nice schemes,
yeah,
lipstick on a pig, as far as I can tell, because I mean, I have no objection to these schemes. Good to have them. They will at least help some element of the school to work transition that the internship
yeah,
program may help with. No harm in increasing, in providing wage subsidies through EPFO, although states have done it for a while. And I've been reminded this afternoon by Amit Basole that we don't actually have good studies of what impact this has had. But set that aside for a minute. Some action has happened, but that action stays firmly in the arena of the formal economy. Now,
yeah. It's yeah.
I
Here,
am
Yamini, I just want to interrupt here. It's very interesting. You say that the whole entire jobs program has been targeted at the top 500 companies, because I just had a conversation with Praveen Chakravarti, who was part of the team which devised the Congress manifesto, and he tells me that their program of apprenticeship was supposed to target all the MSMEs, because that's where the jobs are created, and and MSMEs are labor intensive, so they they are in a position to take more interns. Interns, as per this government calls them interns. The Congress manifesto calls them apprentices.
apprentice. Yeah.
So you're making a very valid point. The formal sector cannot absorb so many new jobs, and 500 divided by, I mean, he did a quick math, 1 crore jobs they're talking about over the next 3-4 years. 500 companies, you divide, then each company will have to absorb some thousands of jobs, which seems on the face of it very impractical. Anyway, carry on. Yeah,
I mean, there's a linked issue here, right? Which is that for the last decade, we policy has used. I mean, the economic imagination has been about trying to grow the economy by growing the formal sector, right?
yeah, yeah,
And to the extent that it has tried to deal with the informal sector, it has said, "Can I use blunt policy instruments?" Demonetization,
yeah,
GST, and other linked incentives, credit guarantee schemes, etc., that they kept promoting over the last decade as blunt policy instruments to force formalization. We saw during the lockdown too that indeed the formal economy was growing. So at one level, quote unquote, all of this is working, but it was working at the cost of the informal economy.
yeah,
And the cost of the informal economy matter because that's where 90% of your workers are employed, right? So what we need to do, I'm not making a case for letting the informal economy just stay informal. I'm saying that we need to be thinking harder about transition pathways. How do you move so that it's organic from informal to formal? And in an AI and technology based economy, you're likely to have a lot of informality anyway, but that's a separate issue which let's park for the moment. There is no thinking on this investment of transition pathways. So we
Yeah.
talk about, so the budget speech says MSMEs and urbanization, both of them are crucial elements of this transition pathway, no argument there, right? But what is it offering for MSMEs? It is telling us that we'll do credit guarantee schemes, old wine, new bottle, old wine, old bottle, actually. Urbanization, we see a little bit of an increase in PMAY, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana for urban. But, it doesn't address the bigger issues. Again, Amit Basole reminds us that, beyond credit, actually the critical binding constraint for small and medium enterprises in urban context is local infrastructure. So do
Yeah.
we, ideally, I would have liked to see a reversal in capex, in that instead of focusing on highways to nowhere, we would be thinking about connecting between villages to cities. Railways, we've seen the craziness that has happened in railways. We've got our bullet trains and Vande Bharats, but the average Indian is going in local trains with in unreserved bogies, most of which we have reduced in order to quote unquote make the railways more profitable. So that's where the money should be going, to build out those transition pathways. And there's absolutely no policy imagination there. The second
Okay.
issue, go ahead.
Hmm. No,
Go ahead.
see, this is one focus area that you said is a gap. No investment in the transition pathway, right? From
Absolutely.
informal to formal.
Yeah.
But for that, they first need to admit that there's a K-shaped growth. If they continue to claim that even during COVID years, there was a huge increase in employment, and while GDP was halving, employment was doubling. If that kind of narrative they believe in, and they do not believe that there's been a K-shaped growth, uh, then if you don't acknowledge a problem, the question arises as to how do you
Are you going to solve it?
design a solution? Unless, as you say, that they know there's a public posture, but internally they know what the problems are. But even then, there doesn't seem to be a transition pathway uh, between informal and formal, because it's only in the last 10 years that we've seen a situation which even Pranab Sen keeps telling me, that we've seen a situation where normally when there's a broad-based economic growth, formal and informal both grow together because there is a link between the two. Formal
Yeah.
outsources to informal. But now it's been 5-6 years that the informal is down and formal is going up. And as you said, the formal is growing at the cost of informal. It's almost like a zero-sum game, right? So how do you come out of this? Now, do you think that the employment the solution that they've come up with, uh, targeting at the formal sector, do you think all the big companies will be able to sustain these many interns and give them sustained employment? Because they need to expand their investment. Normally, when you expand investment, you hire more people, right? At the same level of investment, how do you hire more people? So isn't that a big question? Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think that two things. I think on acknowledging the problem, I would say to some degree the problem has been acknowledged, but the cause has not been diagnosed effectively. It's literally, you've gone to the doctor saying, my heart is feeling a bit tight, and instead of checking whether it's gastro related or a serious cardiac arrest, you're kind of fumbling about. So I think where the diagnosis is missing, this fundamental understanding of how the real of or engagement with the dynamics of the real economy, and part of that, of course, comes from political bluster. So if after an election where you've got a little bit of a rebuke, where from polling data that employment, poverty, and inflation were critical issues that shape voter choices, you still want to kind of take Clem's data and claim that you've created 8 crore new jobs, then you're just not going to be able to diagnose the problem properly. And to be fair to this government, this question of transition pathways of informal to formal, agriculture, farm to non-farm, we've always thought of economic policy in these binaries rather than
Yeah.
recognizing that the two are so closely deeply intertwined. It's we can't afford to keep delaying this recognition. And that brings me to your larger point, that one of the consequences of policy missteps that decimated the informal sector is that effectively you've ended up with growth or at about 8% last financial year, and consumption dragging at 4%, right? So you know that there is a slowdown of demand, and that is where the vicious cycle of demand supply comes. And one of the reasons why, despite this infusion of capex, private investment is not coughing up, despite appeals. I mean, you could see both in the CEA as well as to some extent in the FM speech today, a sense of frustration with the private sector that we've
Yeah,
done
even
all
the
the,
economic survey says that the private sector is not chipping in with its
it's
share
just
of
not
investment.
doing its bit, like,
True.
and a very clear, I mean, I don't disagree with the CEA when he says the jobs have to come from the private sector, but I do disagree if you say that the government does not have a role to play in generating an enabling environment that would make it possible for the private sector. And so when you have capacity utilization stuck at 75%, 70-75% consistently now for some time, you have a problem. You should be diagnosing it instead of looking for quick ticket solutions, that will make it appear as though you're trying to resolve the problem, but frankly, not really.
So Yamini, it's very interesting. Yesterday, I watched Ratin Roy speak on one of the business channels, and uh, and he said this partly in jest, but I thought it was very. He was also being very serious. He was talking about private investment, and he said that in the last many years, private sector, the government says that it's the national duty of the private sector to invest and hire more. So his argument was, Ratin Roy's argument was, and he was part of the Prime Minister Economic Advisory Council, very very well, the first NDA. He said that private sector doesn't work on the principle of national duty. They will invest only if they see demand, and since they've not seen consumer demand grow in the last, say, 6-7 years, government's own data shows consumer private consumption growth has been average 3% over a decade. It only went up
Correct.
to 4% in this year,
Now,
23. So he said that if the private sector is actually making more profits by selling less, so why would they? And by not investing more and by selling less, they are making more money. So where is the incentive for them to invest more? So that is the state of the private sector, and and then we have Miss Sitaraman telling the private sector that you are like Hanuman. I remember she told the FICCI or CI in one of the meetings that you are like Hanuman. You not realize your own strength. Hanuman never realizes his full prowess. So these kind of conversations have also happened in the past. So now coming, so 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 private sector can only do that much, right? So if there is, they'll expand more, put more investment if they see their existing capacities getting like full up, say beyond 90%. They typically start investing when their existing capacities cross 90, which is nowhere near to be seen in any sector, right? So whether you take auto or whether you take steel, etc. So 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 government has been claiming that it is doing all the heavy lifting. Now, do you see in this budget that heavy lifting capex? Is it continuing, or I read the figures show that the capex is the same as in the interim budget, 11 lakh crore odd. So do you think that the strategy of continuing government public investments, government led, will work uh, to resolve all these issues that we are talking about?
look, I mean, by the way, this capexing is not just the last few years, where, of course, we've seen an increase in capex. But I mean, if you go back to even 2017, 18, yeah, I mean, there were, for different reasons, there has been a overall slowdown of private investment now running through little over a decade, right? I mean, some of them are UPA legacy issues, etc. And the general thrust has been public investment to crowd in private investment, and it's been continuing. First we had the problem of twin balance sheets, then we had
Yeah.
the COVID, etc.,
So
and
why hasn't this worked? Why do you think this is still not working?
I mean, I think we need to have a much more nuanced look into it. I think there are possibly sets of things. Certainly, overall, we've talked about the decimation of the informal sector combined with, demonetization GST combined with COVID, creating the environment where you have this massive drag on demand, which has been an issue. I also wonder whether a lot of it also has to do with lack of policy certainty, the fact that it is not a level playing field. Let's be really clear. We have always had cronyism in our capitalism. We have seen now a kind of consolidation of cronyism into one, and maybe the second A come well after the wedding. Perhaps both A's will come at the same level,
Yeah.
which creates its own sets of disincentives. We have also seen it's hard to empirically sort of find evidence to prove this, but I mean the misuse of EDIT, CBI, EDIT, CBI kind of storyline creates an environment of fear which undermines the risk appetite of private
True.
capital.
Some
All of
foreign
this
some foreign investors have been saying this. You're right. Yeah.
so all of this together kind of creates an environment in which risk appetite of private capital is far lower, and you see that there is also a some amount of capital flight too. Like where are the big investments go? Where is big private capital of India going to invest going forward as well? Will give us some indication. So I think there's a whole host of things going on. I don't think that there's anything in this budget that necessarily addresses
Yeah.
several of these challenges. Perhaps it's
Yeah.
asking for too much for a single budget to address these challenges.
Mm.
However, what we need, and several folks have been saying this for some time now, we need an industrial policy or a jobs roadmap. Call it what you will. We need to reinstate confidence of governance
Yeah.
and of fairness and competition within governance. That is a deep political economy challenge, and we need to be sending out the right signals. And so far, it doesn't seem to me that those right signals, at least nothing much has happened in the last month and a half that would suggest that anything is changing. There's
Yeah.
two other elements here. One is related to the center state story.
Yeah.
Okay, and it is, I agree with the CEA, and in fact with the finance minister in her speech today, where they both have highlighted the fact that the next generation of reforms, factor market reforms, are now basically in the arena of mass politics. We've seen that in the context of farm laws. Centers and states need to work together to figure out land, labor, capital, a whole range of things. But what does that mean, right? It means
Yeah.
that you have to create institutional structures and a political environment in which federalism is possible. What we've seen today is really interesting. On the one hand, we've seen that this government is willing to pay some level of price for its coalition, right? It has no choice, so it's given its concessions to Andhra Pradesh and Bihar.
Yeah.
Done it in interesting ways, no special status, but lots of big infrastructure and consistent
Basically,
mention.
they made World Bank fund a lot of their projects.
That
Yeah.
too. Yes,
I
that
think
too.
World Bank is keeping this alliance together.
Yes,
I think we'll
indeed.
keep this
Well,
alliance
let's see
together.
what the World Bank does. Let's see what the World Bank does.
Yeah. Yeah.
But nonetheless, I mean, it's basically said we'll give, where we have no choice, we are willing to give some kinds of concessions. But look at gross tax states devolution to states as a percentage of gross tax revenue. It remains within the range of 33%, which is where it has been for several years now.
Sure.
In
Yeah.
sharp contradiction to what did our 15th Finance Commission and 14th Finance Commission before that say. It said 41% and 42%. So if you're going to continue to ring fence devolution, I mean to ring fence the divisible pool in ways that ensure that you through cesses and surcharges continue to hold on to the bulk of revenue, you reduce the actual devolution to states. Where is the credibility with which you can actually bring states to the table and say,
Yeah.
let's start thinking sensibly of
Yeah.
coordination and
Yamini, correct me if I'm wrong. I read somewhere this today only this number that while 15th Finance Commission had mandated what 42%, 41 or 42% transfer to gross tax revenue to the states, but in actual fact, about 31% is getting transferred. Only 31%.
So 32, yeah, I
32,
mean,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
been in the range of
yeah.
between 31 and
So
33.
you're
This
saying that
whole
the remaining have been appropriated through cesses, etc. Right?
correct, correct,
That's what you're
correct.
saying.
So it,
So yeah, yeah. So this is the finance part. Now, you've done a lot of work on social infrastructure and the interface between center and states in social infrastructure, like such as education and health. Now, you also spoke about factor market reforms. Now, labor is a very important uh, input uh, into factor markets, right? And tell me the way this government has dealt with education uh, and higher education and the NEET system is just one example of how they have kind of subverted the since education was brought in the concurrent list many years ago. So how they have not allowed the states to to build their own education system, therefore build their own skilling, skill sets for their own youth. Uh, this would also, I presume, and the way the NEET controversy has blown in our faces, and the way this regime doesn't seem to be able to conduct exams properly. It, aren't you sort of worried that this will have an impact on this whole this job creation program? Because you need people with some basic skill sets to join as interns even in companies, right? When the companies will bring them to as interns, the companies will also expect that they would have some minimum level of skills and intellectual and other skills, right? So how do you see this?
no, exactly. I mean, I think that it's an this is an important point you're making. Two parts to it. I think if you uh, successively we have been appalling at investing in human capital, health, education, nutrition. These have consistently been areas that successive governments over many decades have under prioritized. What has shifted, though, in the last 10 has been the way in which technology has offered an alternative that is electorally and politically extremely salient for the guarantees, which is not just something, I mean, Modi has, of course, perfected it, but other political parties, Congress and others, have also picked it up, which effectively have made it much more politically salient to do cash transfers and in kind
Yeah.
transfers via direct benefit transfers rather than prioritizing investments in public systems, which are crucial for health, education, and other elements
So
of key
you're
aspects.
saying everybody's put that on the back burner, including opposition
Everyone has
states.
put that on the back burner. With I mean, AAP did some really interesting things in Delhi, but they are all now sitting in jail. So
Yeah, yeah,
perhaps every education leads you into being punished. So maybe that's why there are disincentives there. But
yeah,
no, I mean, more seriously, this has become, this is a serious challenge
yeah.
that cash transfers have basically shifted the balance away from serious investments in health and education towards transfers of all kinds in cash. So even in education, you will see a lot more cash transfers being given for purposes of education, school uniforms, textbooks, just cash transfers to be able to for school choice, etc., which you see rather than active investment in teachers, in pedagogy, in curricula, which are core elements needed, especially in the context of a country where
So
50% is.
this is your conclusion after studying various schemes
Oh, absolutely, across the board.
states.
So that's one aspect of it. And by the way, Modi is really interesting because even though he has a welfarist stance of Modi ki guarantee, in fact, investments in social spending have not been particularly high through the period of his reign over the last
Yeah.
10
But as a
years.
percentage of GDP, it doesn't change much, isn't it?
Absolutely. And as a percentage of total government expenditure, in fact, it reduces from 23% in 15-16 to 18% in the current budget. So
What you're
they
talking about
really,
education, right? Yeah.
no,
Or
I'm talking about social sector spending, including
acha,
education overall.
health,
And
total
yes,
social sector. Come
yes.
again. How much has it reduced?
So
23?
from 50 as a percentage of total government expenditure in 15-16, it accounted for 23%. It's now at 18%. And in this budget, compared to the interim budget, we actually see a marginal drop in allocations to Samagra Shiksha, which is the centrally sponsored scheme for school education. So
Okay.
deprioritization is also now visible along with traditional under prioritization.
Yeah.
The second element here is that these scheme direct benefits.
I want you to just reinforce this point. So you're saying that over a period of 10 years, the Modi government, their rhetoric is that they are spending a lot on social infrastructure. Actually, as a ratio of the total budget, it is declining consistently. You're saying over 10 years. Huh?
Yeah, as a ratio of total expenditure, because they've also reprioritized with capex, right? Especially sharply in the last few years. So, and they have their fiscal management has also attempted to address the fact that revenue deficits were pretty high, and they've tried to
Yeah.
reduce that. So, total government expenditure, except in COVID years, has and after COVID they've tried to reduce it. Now it's at about 14% of GDP,
Yeah.
and capex has sort of stayed at 3.5. So it's in that context also that you need to understand
I
this
want
shift.
to, Yami, I want to just related to this one point. I want you to weigh in on. Some years ago, I read a piece by Jean Drèze where he said he showed that how the Gujarat model was all about uh, raising the massively increasing expenditure on physical infrastructure and at the same time reducing expenditure on social infrastructure. So the two were running in the opposite directions. Do you think something like that has happened at the national level over the last 7, 8, 10 years? Like we
Yeah,
see a lot of
yeah.
lot of expenditure on physical capex, like building roads, airports. I mean, Mr. Modi, he loves physical infrastructure. I think there is he has some preference for physical infrastructure. He likes to, because you can show it visible. You can show that you constructed this, that, airports or whatever, railway stations revamped, Vande Bharat. But so therefore, do you think there's a bias? Has been a bias towards physical infrastructure as opposed to social infrastructure?
I mean, it's really interesting at one level, because yes, and that is correct. But politically, they have actually, I mean, Modi, the Vikas Purush, has also been quite a central part of the story. What he has effectively done is to prioritize these kind of cash and kind transfers, what Arvind Subramaniam calls new welfareism, public funds for
Yeah.
private goods. And he's not expanded the pie, he's just shaped it, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
basically, nutrition schemes, old age pension, etc., have education have seen reductions or have stayed stagnant, and some and their prioritized schemes have seen increases, and they've kind of created, I mean, it'll be good to have data to really say these things effectively. But there is some perhaps improvements in efficiency of delivery. The scale of delivery has also, perhaps by virtue of the kind of PR machinery that's brought around it, it creates this kind of collective sense that बहुत कुछ हो रहा है. After all, मोदी है
Yeah.
तो मोदी है, चीजें हो रही हैं, घर बन रहे हैं, टॉयलेट बन रहा है, राशन मिल रहा है. So perhaps there have been some efficiency gains, but it's not been a massive investment in social infrastructure, and certainly not in core public systems that are needed for health and education.
Okay. So you're clearly saying that social infrastructure spends as a ratio of total expenditure has been coming down over the years, right? Now,
Correct.
the other question is, recently, I don't know whether you read, there was the Reporters Collective had put out some numbers, investigation, they've done some investigations, saying that they run many flagship schemes, as you said. They like to announce schemes. And they also came up with a finding that all of them are underfunded. So, and many of them are in social infrastructure, right? Like the Pradhan Mantri, that insurance scheme, PM's health insurance scheme.
Yeah.
At a national level, which was hailed or which was projected as India's Obamacare or whatever, 50 crore people being covered. Do you think it is adequately funded? Because I don't see where their outcome seems to be very, very abysmal. Even during COVID, number of people who had availed of those schemes from UP, Bihar was very, very, very minuscule compared to the population.
So look, health is not
Ayushman Bharat.
adequate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I forgot the
Ayushman
name.
Bharat.
Yeah.
No, health is not adequately funded, and that is not just Modi. It has just never been for a country at our level of GDP. We spend under 2% on health. That is a serious challenge. The question around health that again, it's a question. How have we imagined the prioritization of health for policy making? There's always been this debate about investments in public systems, primary care versus in insurance, as an alternative. And and in that tension, the resolution that the Modi government arrived at in 2018 when they announced Ayushman Bharat or PMJDY or whatever it was called, was that they would prioritize insurance. But overall, because overall allocations to health haven't seen any great increase despite COVID, you're not going to get adequate funding on either. And I think it's kind of fallen between various tools. There's some things that they've done well. Some health and wellness centers have worked in interesting ways. The presence of the ASHA, which is a good example of why you need to invest in public systems. This started with the National Health Mission back in 2005. The ASHA is now a visible feature across the country. India's success with COVID vaccination owes in no small measure to the presence of the ASHA on the ground along with the ANM. In fact, our COVID experience should be a reminder that there's a lot more to be achieved if you invest in local public systems, both from a jobs point of view, female labor force participation point of view, as well as in strengthening the public system and getting positive health outcomes.
Here, Yamini, here, I just want to, one small intervention. Recently a paper by Raghuram Rajan and his colleague argued that in India you can really create many more jobs in these kind of services, health, nursing, and they're crying out for more people. Like you said, ASHA workers. You can have. First of all, we pay them abysmally. You can Anganwadi, ASHA workers, and many and such services at the level of public government, at the level of government, have massive scope for employment. Do you think that could have been the focus? Could have been a specific focus in this budget, in the context of youths being, brought in as interns. You think we could have brought in more interns in hospitals, healthcare, in other kind of services, nursing services, and what have you? So you think that could have been a focus?
Oh yeah,
here
absolutely.
It seemed like manufacturing, top 500 companies. Now,
yeah,
we don't know whether top 500 companies would want to hire 4,000 interns. So
yeah,
I'm coming back to that. Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree totally. We talk about the jobs problem in binaries of all kinds that are just false binaries, right? So we spoke about formal, informal, farm, non-farm, but similarly public, private. While there is and it's only when you break out of these binaries that you'll start thinking imaginatively, right? So both in terms of grassroots public service as well as local governments that are hugely understaffed, as well as in service industries like health and education, which every single Indian actually requires. There is a lot of scope of expansion. And frankly, in India, we need to be doing all things at the same time. If the government had come out saying we were going to do massive hiring in the public sector, there would be this turnaround going, oh, we're harking back to the socialist era. Actually, every single sector is crying out for people. They need to be hired sensibly. They need to be invested in sensibly. The systems need to operate so that you don't create perverse incentives. I agree with all of that. But it still doesn't negate not making these choices and being more imaginative in policy making than we have been thus far.
Yeah. So finally, Yamini, what's your sense about the growth projection in this budget? The economic survey talked about 6.5% to 7% growth for the medium term. I thought that was a very low ambition, and the budget itself, nominal GDP growth is projected about 10 to 10.5, and if you take 4% as inflation, which is normal, 4.5, so they're projecting about 6.5% growth, and recently there was a Citibank research, if you recall, which the government contested, which said that at 6.5, 7% growth, India cannot absorb uh, all the new entrants into its labor market year after year. So is you do you see the ambition is very modest, 6.5%-7% growth? I mean, I'm saying I'm asking this because this government is known for hype in everything else. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
they
yeah.
talk nothing less than. So I would have thought that they would say 8%, at least some. You know, I mean, the hype was missing in their GDP growth projection. What do
Yeah,
you
yeah,
think?
no, I absolutely. In fact, I was going to respond to you by saying for a government that is always full of bluster and hype, it's actually kind of heartening that there's sobriety and conservatism at one level in its growth projections. But there's also doesn't seem to be, as a consequence, because obviously what follows is given that, if we have ambitions of becoming Viksit Bharat in 2047 and we're not going to grow at 8, 9, 10%, what should we be expecting? There is no urgency to the need to reevaluate and reimagine and be more inventive and move fast, which is at one level perhaps inevitable for a third term. Sometimes it's not, even though it's a rebuke, it's not so much complacency as much as just exhaustion sets in and new ideas are hard to come by. So you get stuck in certain old ways, and I think perhaps we are also seeing a reflection of that. But taken all together, I think what is has long been missing in our policy making, what we urgently need to bring back now, sometimes we talk about it as industrial policy, sometimes we talk about it as job strategy. To be fair to Nirmala Sitaraman, she says in her speech that she is working towards an economic policy that will be tabled. I think that that's what we need. We need a medium to long term growth strategy,
Okay.
one that acknowledges the strengths and limitations of the path that we adopted since 1991. It's been 30 years now. It's now 30 plus years. It's time to reevaluate. See, lots of things have changed. Even factor markets today function in very different contexts and on very
Yeah.
different terms than when we first started talking about factor. I mean, and labor is a classic example, right? Our labor laws neither support capital nor labor. In fact, in all the talk about deregulation, we are further undermining any kind of protection to labor, despite the fact that we see again people are moving. They need their vulnerabilities to informality and to the kind of labor, the kind of employment we are able to generate. So we need to be thinking innovatively, and absolutely no engagement and innovation, which is really necessary. It should be cross disciplinary. It should be across sectors. It should be across a wide range of stakeholders. I've been advocating wishfully. I know it will not happen, but I do think a special session of parliament that debates jobs
Yeah.
would be an important thing to do. I think that our politicians actually they have to go periodically every 5 years to be re-elected. They have a good understanding of ground level realities, regardless of what ideological context they come from. When forced to engage, they are actually good and sensible, real ideas, far greater than what most bureaucrats can produce.
Yeah.
And that's what we should be headed towards.
And Yamini, what do you make of all the announcements made around agriculture policy? It seemed like a lot of, to me, it seemed like a lot of noise, nothing in specific. I mean, not addressing the fundamental issue of input costs having gone up so much all these years, and the farmers not getting the price, and their whole promise of doubling the farmers'
Farmers'
income.
income
No
gone away.
mention of doubling of farmers. No mention of farmers' income.
Yeah.
Uh, so, what did you make of the all the announcements around agriculture? There were quite highfalutin things about how agriculture needs to be made ecologically friendly and a lot of scientific inputs, this, that, the other. What do you make of all that?
Noise, and more noise. If you look across budget speeches, you will find agriculture has been coming in the front and center of the budget speech now, if I recall, at least two, three, four budgets in a row. But it adds up to very little if we don't have anything beyond that. And in fact, since the fiasco with the farm laws, there has been no articulation of where we are supposed to go now,
Yeah.
with farm laws. And again, it's the same thing. I think that again, our public discourse on this, policy discourse on this, also outside of partisan politics, is lazy. It keeps saying, oh, it was because of the lack of stakeholder consultation. Actually, these were laws that sought to deregulate markets completely, quickly, with the blunt, same thing. We're using a blunt instrument without actually understanding the realities of markets and how they operate, and the real vulnerabilities of even our Punjab, Haryana farmers whose paddy might be polluting our cities and causing all sorts of other issues for us. We entered into that equilibrium out of a compact for food security that was necessary in the 60s and 70s. We need a new compact. We have to think through those transition pathways. We have to build realistic understandings of agriculture markets, of what is good regulation, where state investments are needed, where they should exit, and then build these out sensibly with stakeholder consultation. The failure of the farm laws was not just because we didn't consult and these were bulldozed through parliament. Those were, of course, problems, but because they were also badly designed and decontextualized from the realities on the ground. And we need to be able to recognize that to go further, to move ahead.
Yeah. So basically, Yamini, you're saying that you use the word transition pathways for both agriculture and for industry, right?
Yeah.
And I think this understanding of transition pathways is I think is the most critical thing, which I think we haven't. Uh, our whole system, our whole bureaucracy, its intellectual capital, or the intellectual capital provided by by economists and other who work with the government laterally, not being able to, or even the industry, not being able to really work towards transition pathways. I don't know when this will happen, and and I find that we keep going back and forth. This government has been going back and forth on many big policy initiatives. For instance, this budget had no mention of privatization, and not that I'm a big votary of privatization or asset monetization, simply because Mr. Modi a few days ago very clearly said privatization kind of indicated is on the back burner, and the political economy of that is very clear. They lost so badly in UP, and in UP there's a big debate over what will happen to reservation if all the public sector companies are privatized and
Yeah.
all the assets are monetized. You hand over GAIL, roads, railways to the via asset monetization, then will they hire people from will they have reservation? So all these questions they plague this government, and they plague all governments. So so let us hope that these transition pathways in future become more clear to all of us. First to the government itself, policymakers themselves, then to us, people like us who watch all this from outside. Thank you, Yamini, for
If I may just say
talking.
one small thing on this before we close,
Yeah,
I absolutely agree. We don't have answers. We need a lot of humility. But in trying to find answers, we also need to stop being so insecure and clamping down on free thinking and space
yeah,
for critique and dissent. I mean, if all of academia is spending all their time dealing with FCRA laws, tax laws, institutions are being shut down on a routine basis,
yeah.
case in point, where are the ideas going to come from? The culture of silence basically means that everyone is going to tell you, like industry has started doing. Every time you ask them how was the budget, they'll say 10 on 10. Now you ask us an independent expert, they will also say 10 on 10 in order to survive and be able to
Yeah,
continue to have
yeah, yeah,
jobs. So, you have
yeah,
to be open to a free thinking environment in order to really challenge the ecosystem. And that is a message that our politics must recall.
yeah.
Must
That this Yamini calls for a completely separate discussion on whether genuine knowledge flows are happening. That what is happening to that ecosystem. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
exactly.
all the
Exactly.
best. Yeah.
Thank you.
You put up a good fight at the CPR. Anyway, so we
Thank
are all
you.
fighting. Thanks.
Yes, indeed. Thanks. Bye.